Good morning. Welcome to Jefferson Originals podcast series. I'm your host, Tom Howe, and once again, I'm being joined by Dr. Fiona Wilson. In today's episode, we're going to discuss culture within the workplace and the value it has. Now, the reason this topic has come up in conversation internally here is more born out of our merger and acquisitions teams. And the reason being is that I'm not sure if it's general knowledge, but if you do some basic research and certainly from the stats we've gathered over the last 10 years, normally, on average, they say 74% of acquisitions fail within the first 3 years. Now, they can fail for a variety of reasons, but there is one common theme that has been identified throughout, and it's actually normally to do with cultural shifts. And the reason being is that if you think on the basic level, you've got two different businesses trying to come together, and normally they are merged into one business, and you have two very different cultures. And the problem you have is that when an acquisition has taken place, there is a lot of unrest, vulnerability, people feeling slightly exposed, maybe feel they might be competing for their jobs against their counterparts on the other side of the fence. And that's just it. Fence. There you go. There is that divide, and it's trying to weave your way through that to create and develop almost and give birth to a new culture of how the business should move forward as the business evolves, rather than what tends to happen in the first year of any acquisition is that it's the honeymoon period for the first 6 months, and then you have businesses, normally the lead business that has done the acquiring tends to want the business they bought to focus on the numbers, and that is fundamentally where the direction goes. Where the business that tends to succeed, though, and don't crumble over the years, is where they brought in either transformational coaches or organizational cultural specialists to come in and help make that transition. And it's a soft transition. It's something that you can have health checks over a 12-month period, but to help shape and define, because some business leaders believe that culture is organic, and that you can't force and create. And others realize that actually with the right investment and the right support, you can actually change culture, and you can actually develop subcultures at the same time. And obviously the impact that has been proven tenfold to be successful. So look, we're just going to jump straight into this one. I'm going to reintroduce Fiona, just for those of you who might not be familiar with her. She's our specialist transformational coach and focuses on organizational culture at the same time. So I want to kick this off with you, Fiona, if that's okay. I want to fire my first question to you because you know more than I do in this space, clearly. First question to you is, look, creating a culture, how does this happen? Obviously from grassroots up.
It's interesting because you said, oh, hi, Tom, sorry. But it's interesting launching straight in. It's interesting because you said about an organic culture. So I would say that it's more specific than that. And if you just leave things organically, you're probably just going to end up with lots of different subcultures set up by different people within different parts of your organization. And there won't be potentially an overriding culture because those could be quite conflicting. So I think that actually you do need to have an explicit awareness of culture, first of all. I don't think it can just be allowed to grow. And I don't think even if you think that's happening, I don't think that is happening. I think that a culture is being created, because a culture is created through the policies and practices that you do day to day. And it's really interesting, and we'll come back to this, that if those don't align with what you want your culture to be, then you're going to have a massive culture gap, and that's a phrase that will keep coming up. So if you wanted to create an organizational culture, you would decide whether you wanted it to be top down or bottom up. That's the first question. So when we talk about organic, the nice idea of that would be to be a bottom up culture. And I've been involved with an organization who allowed a bottom up culture to happen over a period of time, but it was incredibly managed. The process. So you're actually seeking to listen and find out what the organization, what their values are, the people within your organization that you've recruited, What do they think the day-to-day looks like? What do they think the organisation stands for? What do they think it should look like on a day-to-day basis and how it should be lived out? And then that takes time. It's still, you can still work and function very successfully. The organisation that I worked with in that manner was a sports organisation that was the leader in Europe during that time. But that takes time and it takes trust. And I think it's probably, you're talking about when you're looking at acquiring a company, it's probably not the time for that, because this takes time. And you're probably better if you're in an established organization and you want to do a refresh, you want to take it to the next level, or you want to reconsider things. So when you're looking at a merger and acquisition, then you're looking at taking those two cultures, then you need to have a real explicit awareness of what you want the new culture to be. And I think it is a top down. So you would want to bring in a top-down culture during moments of acute change, because you've got to help people actually to manage that change and know what they're doing, so they know what tomorrow looks like. If it's undefined and you just leave it to be organic and think, oh, we'll get there, or we'll come to that in 12 months and we'll decide, what you'll have is you'll have a lot of people panic because they don't know what's going to happen. People in both organisations, where I'm doing it simply with the idea of a larger organisation and smaller, but I understand it could happen with several organisations at once. But what happens is the people in the organisation, the larger, the more sustained one, they're still going to be fearful of what happens when a new organisation comes in, because they might fear that other culture might be stronger, which it could be. You know, it might have an ingrained culture, so they've got a fear. And then the company that's smaller and being acquired, they absolutely, everybody within that is going to want to know what their day-to-day looks like, because that's what the culture does. It defines what time you turn up, when you have lunch, where you have lunch. It defines all those little things that really, really matter to everybody day to day. You know, the first day you go into work in a new job, you want to know where the kettle is. I hate that thing. You always think, I'm going to starve, because you're never going to know where to go for lunch. There's that thing, isn't there? It's true. We might all be going into senior leadership positions, but it doesn't matter. You want to go know where you're getting your lunch.
Where's the fridge? Where's the kettle?
Where's the kettle? Where's the fridge? What do people do? What do they wear? Or, you know, those things are defined by the culture. They're not defined by individuals.
This is funny. I love that, because actually I'm going to rewind here a little bit, because it's funny when I say to people, you know, what's the culture in your business? And I get some businesses turn and say, well, we do free breakfast once a week, or we do I know a business loan for a right to work scheme, or something along those lines. And I think sometimes, weirdly, people don't always understand what actually is when we say culture, what is culture, as in within the business environment, what is the building blocks that actually makes and defines a culture? And it's not business vision, but I thought, could you just tap onto for the people who may be slightly not confused, but are maybe not fully aware of what actually culture is within the work environment?
Yeah.
And how would it be best described?
So I'm going to use a theorist called Shine here, and they talk about the 3 elements, or 3 layers, or 3 levels of culture. So there's the artifacts, there's the buildings that you're in. So there's the actual where your physicality of your business, and you know, you've chosen a place to work that has that represents you, whether you've done it consciously or not. You've chosen, you know, to whether you want to be on the 50,000th floor of the Shard, or whether you want to be in a converted stable block out in the countryside. You've done that because that represents the culture. That can also, the artifacts can also be things like uniforms, and I use that in a soft way, because your organization, it might be that it is a real everybody wears a black t-shirt type environment. So there could be a kind of a sort of almost
militant,
unconscious there. So that's the artifacts, and then there are the policies and practices, and this is how it drives a culture, and that's the policies and practices. So what's a really good example of where this can work would be things like when you try and change the culture. So when looking at inclusive practices and looking at the language that's used, for instance, in your marketing information or your advertising, making sure that it has inclusivity in it will drive the culture generally, and making sure, for instance, that in all communication that happens within your organization, that you're mindful of terminology that will drive a stronger inclusive culture. So that's where you would look to do that. A culture gap in that area, the best one for this is well-being, where you have a really lovely policy written down saying we're going to offer this, this and this, and you offer a yoga class on a Tuesday lunchtime, but the conflict to that is actually that your sales policy is that you expect turnaround to be within an unrealistic time frame, and you're putting huge pressure on everyone, so you get a conflict there and a culture gap. You're saying your policies are actually working against each other. So you can have those. And then there's the values underneath that. So the values are the things that are informing everything else. There are the values and beliefs that inform that culture. And then underneath that, there's what really happens. So there's what the leaders. So there's all of those things that you should be explicitly aware of. And designing when you're looking at your organization. And then there's the day-to-day, and it's being mindful of, does the day-to-day, is there a gap between all of the things that you're trying to foster and sustain within a culture, and then what's actually happening? And if you've got that culture gap, then there is something wrong. The fundamental thing that's happening is that you're either not communicating your culture clearly enough all the way through from recruitment, or you're recruiting the wrong people. And that's really problematic, because if you recruit someone who's not aligned with your culture, it has the potential to really cost you a huge amount.
I don't love that. I know exactly what you mean. Obviously, from our talent acquisition team, see, this is why it's such an interesting subject matter, because when I talk to the talent acquisition teams, and we talk about obviously working at normally the very top levels of putting in either key disruptors, as in market disruptors, they're going in at a very senior level, managing director, head of client services, along those lines, or head of creative. They have such a weight on them to make an impact and turn into a business. And we have seen, we've unfortunately consulted with clients where they've brought on, they thought were a super name, somebody with obviously all the track record, but that individual's been parachuted into business, and culturally there's been a huge upset and clash of bodies and points of view. And actually, I've seen businesses lose revenue and their position in the marketplace in as early as 12 months, because that individual has obviously a different set of agendas. Maybe it's been miscommunicated from the top. There's 101 reasons, but I've seen businesses fall off the back of it beyond a year, where they haven't gone in and gone, right, well, this is obviously clearly not working. It doesn't matter that it's a bit, I always look at the thing of a bit like a duck or a swan, a bit more elegant. On the top, on the surface, it might look all serene and sublime, and you've brought in a heavyweight to drive your business forward. But underneath, it's chaos under there, because behind the scenes, there are clashes of personalities that don't work. Nobody really knows how to fix it. But obviously, the business has invested so much into this individual that they want to give that person a chance. But then they realize people are starting to leave, or they start to, the teams around these personalities go, you know what? And especially now, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. COVID has changed the marketing services world unbelievably so. I mean, we can talk about, and that will probably be the one for next podcast. We're going to talk about, obviously, flexible working and how that's changed. You and I talking about obviously culture shifts in businesses where pre-COVID, especially in the agency environment, we were traditionally all in the office. You would go in and you'd share the blood, sweat, and tears of doing a pitch. And I remember my old days in the agency. Nothing was better for me than, we had the heartaches of working till like 1 o'clock in the morning, reworking an idea so it was the best possible idea that we could possibly make. And we overworked it, maybe sometimes too much. But when you were sitting next to your colleagues, with a slice of pizza and that warm bottle of beer, just to try and take the edge off, because you're trying to work through that next concept and make it pop it a little bit further, that actually brought people together. I mean, we all moaned about it afterwards, and whether you're successful or not at the end of that pitch, that's camaraderie, that team spirit of being in the same environment, and brainstorming. I mean, we still have it in our business, brainstorming over Zoom compared to face to face. It's a very different experience, and I think agencies, especially, and I think people sometimes lose sight of this. Marketing agencies and ad agencies, etc., aren't like a bank or more corporate environments. They're very, very different, and I think that I'm going to be careful how I word this. I'm going to say loyalty for the time being, but I think employees now, because they're working from home and they may be more efficient or productive, shall I say, I think there is definitely a shift in, I won't say commitment, but there's definitely a shift in mentality on how employees who work from home feel about their employers and the business. And I think there is a growing disconnect. Don't get me wrong, from a bottom line perspective, they're doing the job. But do they feel, when you do a survey and you say, how connected do they feel to their employer and to the business and the brand, so to speak? It's shifted because their brand or their culture, shall I say, is actually their culture's at home. And actually, you and I talked about this last week. That culture connection they have is actually probably with the dog, the milkman, the environment they have at home, or the interactions they have there, rather than within an office environment. But I don't know what your views are on that, but that's something I've witnessed over the recent years.
I've thought about this, and since we talked about it as well, and I do think. I think there's a perception that culture was really strong from what you're talking about, but I would never trust an organisation with a beer fridge. Because I remember going in also to an organisation where there was a post office. I mean, a big company, in West London, who had a post office, a hairdresser. You never needed to leave, and so I would say there's a cultural manipulation going on with that. You're like, oh, you don't need to go, stay here and work. But I think there was a perception that there was a lot, and I think the point that you've made, that the bottom line is still being met. So then I think it's about going back to what your core business is. And if your core business is creativity, and it is so in that area, then I think it's about thinking about what culture now fits a disjointed workforce. How can you foster that so that you've still got that sense of building a team, but a team that is going to be in different places? Now, obviously, this can work because there are companies that have worked like this for years. It can be very strong. But I think people have got to think more cleverly, actually, and in a really lovely way. They've got to think more both about what the business actually does, and also about the people that they're hiring, to find something that really connects people. So when you are coming together, you have to really consciously think of, when you do bring everybody together, how are you going to get them to feel the culture and to build that culture when they come together. So if your core business is creativity, but you need everybody to work smarter, maybe there is this sense of people being disparate, and therefore time frames are shifting, and that's not something you want to, that's not part of your culture. You want to be a culture of fast turnaround. That's something that's really important to you. Then how do you build that into the team meetings where you bring everybody on site? How do you literally, through the processes of that day, so making sure that runs to time, making sure that you mention, that you bring people back on time, giving people tasks, they go away, fun things maybe, but they do things, and they have a specific time that they've got to turn this around in. So it is layering it constantly through. The strongest cultures are the ones that layer it through every aspect, from how someone answers the phone to how you book your holiday. Everything will be layered around that particular way of being. And we know those organizations. You don't need to mention them. We all know.
Yeah, of course.
And there is that thing of, we're not building a cult, but we are hoping that you are layering what your expectations are through everything. And it's not to the detriment of your workers. I'm not suggesting that. It's just, it should be that it helps them to actually become part of the culture and to honour the culture as they're working in it. So I think it's about a third way.
Yeah.
I think it's about evolving, and it's about thinking about, how can you make make that work. But I think you've got to be very clear about what type of culture you've got. This week I was talking about the different types. So there's things like the clan culture, where you have the matriarch, patriarch, the person at the center of it.
Yeah.
There's the role culture, where you have groups of people who all have a specific role. And it's thinking again about what kind of culture you want. Do you want a hierarchical culture, a flat culture? And if you want a flatter culture, how do your meetings help that? How are people communicating without you at the center? Otherwise, you are just going back to that clan culture or a web culture that comes out from that dominant individual. So, it's really important to think about what you want your culture to look like, and then adapt it to now. There's no point in harking on about the old days, because you're not going to recruit people.
Yeah.
People have a totally different expectation now. And so, it's not about trying to drag people back. I think there's this dialogue at the moment that's all about dragging people back into the office. Well, that, it's not going to work in the long term, because people will go elsewhere, won't they?
Yeah,
You said that.
Of course, yeah.
So it's just finding it's looking at this now and thinking, how do we make people at home feel that they are part of something, make them feel that they are and want to be part of that. But part of that is about recruiting. Again, it goes back to you want to be clear at recruitment what your values are, who you are, and it's okay in an interview for both parties to go, well, that's not me and you're not us. And I think people are afraid of that, but it's really,
they are.
I think it's important as a candidate, if you're going to an interview, to go in and go, no, that's not me. I used to do a lecture on this, or I'd take a big box of Quality Street in, one of the big tubs, and I'd ask everybody what their favourite Quality Street was, and everyone could tell you. But people don't think, what's my culture?
You're bang
and
on.
it should be as familiar to us of what kind of culture we like. And if you go to work in the wrong culture, it's hell. It's the same job, job, but it's hell. It's just, we don't think about this enough.
It's, you know what, it's funny because, well, it's not funny because I do think it's almost say undervalued. So it's funny from our side, when we talk to a client and we don't just want a job description. We know the roles at the back of our hands. Most roles are fundamentally the same in whatever business within a particular space. An account manager, for example, in one agency, that role is going to be exactly the same across a wide portfolio of agencies that do exactly the same thing. That role won't change. The questions that we try to get in and ask is, I want to know the culture. What kind of structure is it? Flat structure. We talked about web structure. Is it clan culture? Understanding how they operate. I mean, there's one of our clients, which I love this. They do unlimited holidays. There actually isn't a limited amount of holidays. Now, obviously, that's giving you, the employee, the responsibility to say, well, I'm going to, whatever holidays you want, but there's still a job to do. So it's empowering that individual to have even more freedom, but obviously responsibility for themselves. Now, on one aspect, I really do love that, but it's funny, the ones where, so when we then come back to the reverse, we've got the information from our clients on culture and the vision of the business, et cetera, as well as obviously the role. Well, when we're interviewing, yes, okay, the CVs and the information on there is quite standard, but actually I need to scratch behind that. I'm not so interested about the mechanical words on that CV that are Boolean words perfectly aligned, so they knew that we were going to be, they'll pop up in a search. But I want to understand the individual, because it's too easy, and we have to take some responsibility as recruiters. It's too easy to find somebody who on paper is perfect, who does the job at a competitor business, and you can just put them across and our client will go, well, that's just great. Of course, they've done the exact role at a competitor agency. This must be a win-win. Not always, because if you don't understand the individual and what makes them tick emotionally, as well as obviously from a cultural standpoint and what they're looking for, some people, again, we're going to use the example of a account manager. Not all account managers want to be client service directors or managing directors. Some are really good and love and are passionate about just doing a great job, delivering for their clients and being part of a team, but they're not gregarious and outgoing, and they're not hungry to be this dominating force in the industry. They just want to feel value and enjoy the work that they do. There's nothing wrong with that, because every business needs people like that. But sometimes I think candidates tell us, what they think we want to hear, and then they're put into environments based on the misinformation the individual is given because they wanted to portray themselves in a certain way. You tend to find that person is kidding themselves to get themselves a job that actually it's not in the right cultural environment for them. And that's a problem.
Absolutely. I also think it's really hard to put our finger on it because it's a gut feeling.
Yeah.
So the best way for people to understand what culture they like is just to think about where they like to work. Even if it was their Saturday job when they were 16, working in a coffee shop as a barista, what was it about that they loved? If moving beyond the lack of responsibility and things like that.
Yeah.
But what was it? Was it the fact that they knew everybody, that everybody knew each other, that they went on socials all the time? Was it about the fact that they, that the manager was one of them? Because those kind of power relationships are really important when you're going into work somewhere, and how you're made to feel.
Yeah.
But it is really difficult. From the employee's perspective, you only know when you're there. So that interview process is pivotal, which is why some companies make that interview process last a very long time and look at scenarios because they're trying to work it out. But a clever candidate will just say the right thing, like you say. We can read the situation and say the right thing. So that's problematic. But I think that from an organizational perspective, it's therefore, and this comes back to this where we began with the mergers and acquisitions, I think it's not being afraid to be explicit about the culture.
Yeah.
And to say, this is where culture we're going to go for here, and to accept and expect fallout. And when I say fallout, I mean people leaving. Yeah. Because if you're going to go in and you're going to change the culture in the company that's been acquired, then some of the people will go, thank God, I've been waiting for a new lease of life. This is exactly what I wanted. Brilliant. They will stay with you.
Yeah.
Others will go, this is horrific and I don't want to be part of it.
Yeah.
What I think is important is not to lose the right people because you're not managing the change properly, and that's slightly different. So I think you'll have some people who'll just maybe panic out of fear and feel uncomfortable with it, not really allow the new culture to bed in, and you may lose them along the way. And that's what you want to avoid, because those may be people you really want to keep. They may have been linchpins in the business. So, and I think if you have that kind of free fall where there isn't this, a good sort of plan of action of how you're going to implement the change of culture, that's where you can have something catastrophic go wrong, because nobody knows where anybody's going and people leave that are really important, and then that creates more fear and you just free fall then. So I think as well, it is about being really explicit about the culture that's going to be being brought into the new organization, but also maybe putting in a time frame for that, because if you're going in, and it depends whether you want to watch and listen for the first 12 months, 6 months to see what the organization you've acquired is like, let it roll, but if it's not in a financial position for you to do that and you have to move quicker, then I think you have to make everybody aware of that. I think everyone needs to be heard. Now, with top-down leadership and top-down implementation of change and culture, not everyone's going to have a say, but you can still listen. And you can still appreciate that people are going to react in different ways to this process. So giving them a forum and a voice is really, really important, whilst it may not have a massive impact on the plan that's coming in. It can still potentially have, it can have some implication in it, but it also, people do need to feel that they are being heard. So I think it's being aware as well that you are then moving into change management, and that you need to manage that really carefully and in stages, and have change makers that will help you to bring that through. And it's assessing, doing an audit on your staff to see who aligns with that culture, who is currently, and who might align with it, or who is never going to. And I think, again, it's a level of honesty.
It's honesty. Yeah. And it's hard, because I think nobody wants to. Sometimes it's sometimes scary to look in the mirror, and that actually metaphor works across all things in life. But sometimes you have to, and be prepared to make that leap of change for the mid to long term greater good. And I know we've worked with businesses in doing that before in the past, and it is a journey, and sometimes it's a test of nerve, but it always ends up being a positive experience at the end of it. It just has sometimes a bumpy road along the way, which leads me perfectly to my next question then. So what's involved then in implementing sort of a change in culture? I mean, obviously it's all very well saying, right, I want to make a change. What do I do? Where do you start when you know that you've got challenges at the moment? What's the first step to do?
I think it's about going right back to basics. And I think it is about the leadership team deciding what the company is about. What are the values that are, what's driving this? What's the business mission? And what are the values within that? So it comes back to that first level. And then it's about doing an audit of the current policies and practices to see what aligns with that and what doesn't. And that's where you can listen to people. You can open that up to conversations with each. If you're looking at an organisation that has different departments, you can look at that on a department basis. You can go into them and say, we think this is the current business. We think this is where we want to go with it. Well, we know this is where we want to take it. Let's do it. What policies and practices, and that's a big term. I know these are two big terms, but they cover everything. What policies and practices within your department do you think currently align with where we want to be? What do you think would need to shift? And in there, you are allowing people to have a voice in that process. You're allowing them to inform you, because you can't possibly know as well everything that's going on in the different departments. So you need to do an audit, as always, of where you are now and an assessment. And then you need to put in place a plan of how you might transition the business from one place to the next. And you need to know what that looks like. And then you've got to do a roadmap of how you're going to get there and who's going to help you. So if you have got several different departments, you're going to need people in each department as the change makers who are going to help lead that department towards the new culture. It's got to be managed extremely carefully. It will not organically happen.
No.
And therefore, it's in that process what you would like as well. If there are people who are suddenly not going to be comfortable in it, you've got time. And if you're a great organization, you've got time for that person to find their own new, to move on in a nice, timely fashion without any destruction to anyone. That's also what you want to do. You want to look after the people that have been in an organization. But if there's an explicit discussions and there's a time plan, you're not saying tomorrow, you're saying this is where we're going, we're doing an audit. If you don't like this, great, we'll work with us, but then you can move on to somewhere else. We'll help you to do that. It allows that management to be as pain-free as possible, rather than a ruthless takeover where people are just thrown into the dogs. But it just is about this honesty, it's transparency, being explicit. I'm not sure why I think people are reticent because they actually don't know. I think that's the thing. I don't think people don't want to be honest. I just think nobody sits down and actually thinks, what do I want this to be? What does this look like? And plans it out. What are our processes for recruitment? What are our processes with client management? What are all these processes saying and doing? And it is going right through every aspect of business and seeing what aligns with where you want it to be and what doesn't. And stopping doing what doesn't and putting into place new processes that help you, which is why people hire in people to help them, because it's a big job.
Yeah, it's funny because well, actually, I was going to lead on to another question then. So let's say a client wants to look at doing cultural change. They've identified some weaknesses, whether it's they've got a higher turnover of staff than usual than they would anticipate, or they've gone through, or they've just completed an acquisition, shall we say. How long does this process take to do? You talked about cultural audits and then putting the building blocks into place, but how long should a business think I need to invest time to get the results I'm looking for?
That's I'm going to be annoying because it depends how significant the change is. Because you're going to have resistance to change and you're going to have to bring people on board. It depends on your individuals in your organization. So say they've had this, so the worst case scenario would be where you've had a particular, so if you're taking over an organization that's had the same leader for 20 years, which happens, they are going to take a very long time to move forward. And you are probably going to lose quite a lot of staff because that was a very entrenched culture. But if it's a much younger organisation and the culture's been a bit chaotic and hasn't been very explicit, then it will be quite quick. You could do it within 12 months. Nice. So it just depends on the organisation that you're coming into.
That's a good point.
And I think that the other thing is that even in that one I gave you, the worst case scenario for bringing change about, there is an element you'll have to just be more ruthless there to bring in the new culture, and you will therefore have more people potentially move on. And I think that's the thing. The picture will look very different depending on the culture was there previously.
No, that's fair.
The fact that an organisation that is being acquired would suggest, and not always, I guess, it depends whether that company has been successful in that position as well. Because if you've been successful, why would you wish to change?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, obviously, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Mentality, I'm sure, applies for some businesses.
But then that would be really difficult for the new so the new leader of the organisation that's acquiring that to lead an organisation that does not fit your culture. That's as bad as working for an organisation that doesn't fit your culture. So what would happen is that leader would just be subliminally kind of bringing in their own things, and again you may get free fall, because you'd get a clash then of him. Well, we've been doing it like this, and they say we can continue to do this, but he's put something in place, or she's put something in place, or they've put something in place that doesn't align with that. So you'd get a massive culture gap eventually coming out.
Yeah, I agree. See, it's funny. I mean, I've been in this game for now 15, 16 years. And then before that, I've worked within businesses, and I've had some of my own in the past as well. And I've made some mistakes. And I do remember one particular one I made. And I see this a lot with some of our clients, funnily enough, that they might be riding a wave at a particular moment in time. And they may be the most dominant business in their space. And everybody wants to work for that organization. And it only ever takes, and I'm now talking about personal experience here, it only takes to hire, I wouldn't say the wrong leader, but because they are very experienced in what they do. And in this example, I was attracted to this person's experience and their deliverables and what they've done before in the past. And I thought, brilliant. And all I could see was the value on their backstory and what they've done and for wonderful businesses before. And I thought, I've got to have that individual in my business. Put them in, not doing a total cultural review myself of that person's way of running business. That person's way is very different to the way that I'd been doing it before in the past. So when you moved me out of the scenario and I had somebody else in, yes, okay, I was still involved. The teams underneath were then reporting into a different personality, had a very different way of working. And from being at the top of our game at that precise moment in time, that our business suddenly had higher than normal churn of talent leaving, unfortunately, not because the leader I put in was bad, horrible, mean. It wasn't that at all whatsoever. It was just a different tempo, different style of doing things. And some individuals, because we hadn't managed it, or I hadn't managed it properly, more to the point, I didn't identify it, probably it's too late. And then from having people wanting to join me, all of a sudden I had people leaving. And then when you had some key characters, and this is what I see all the time in businesses, and I've got a long list of, unfortunately, businesses we've worked for in the past, and I've seen it before, and it comes back down to cycles. When you bring senior people on board, and it only takes certain key individuals to be unhappy, and then they leave, and they are like a subculture themselves. They're normally a mini, you've talked about it earlier, they could be a head of a mini clan within a social sector within that business. And when that person leaves, who might be very charismatic, very funny, whatever it is that makes people feel good about themselves, and that person decides to leave because they've been mismanaged, all of a sudden, other people go, oh, well, if he's going, then maybe I should. And it's funny, when the markets are really good, that's when you start to see high turnover. And then businesses change.
So really, yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is if you were thinking about acquiring an organisation that is successful, so maybe you need to think, actually, that's not me that should be running that. I need to bring someone in who perpetuates that culture, who reflects that culture. So actually taking a step back and going, I'm not the right fit, actually. As much as I've acquired this organisation, I want it to carry on for 12 months as it is because it's successful. I'll look at it in the 12 months and maybe we'll look at what we want to do 5 years. But I don't want to destabilize it. I don't want to be the disruptor. No. Therefore, I need to put someone in that will fit. So maybe we're actually promoting someone internally will be their best sustainable model for that organization to be able to sustain its culture and keep being successful. rather than me coming in or parachuting someone from my other organisation, which people do. They bring in someone from another organisation that's done really well, and it just is the worst, because that person's on a high as well. They've done really well. They think everything they're doing is really good because they've been told that, and they go in and everyone sits there. And I like to call them, and it's no disrespect to people called Brian, but the Brians will sit in the corner of the office just going, well, I'm not doing that. Well, I'm not doing that. Any idea that's there, well, that's not happening. No. And they will double their efforts to do everything the way they want to do it. So they will become immovable.
I know. It's because I've seen it in personal as well as business. There's some people who, and when you question them, you say, why are you so stuck on, or almost stubborn in not accepting the change? And it's because some people actually generally don't like change, and sometimes they cling on to the past thinking that, well, I like the past. Well, that's great, and so do I. But everything evolves, unfortunately. It does, and you can't stop it. It's a natural. It's funny. The other thing I did notice is that from merger and acquisition, again, going back from when acquisitions are completed, depending on whether the business leader it stays or not. Now, some business leaders go, I've been in my business for a long period of time. I've put a succession plan in place. And these are normally the more vulnerable businesses. They put the succession plans in place with management behind the individual, so they can say, well, look, I'm not actually the business. I've got a management team beneath me. I want the sale, but I want to go afterwards. I've done my 20, 30 years, wherever it's been, and I want out. That is actually a really exposing situation, because normally it's because those business leaders, owners, almost devalue or undervalue the importance they have on setting that culture. So when you immediately take that person out, even if they weren't directly involved in the business on a day-to-day, heavily involved in that business, but they're normally a sort of personality, that person sometimes misunderstands the importance they have, and why people join that business is because of normally of that one or two individuals who are the founding founders of said business. So when they leave, it's almost like a Band-Aid moment. You're ripping it off, and then you're going, wow, we've then got to, we've then got to try and patch over, and hopefully whoever's stepping into that position in the new world order, shall we say, it's hard. And then the other one I noticed is that then you've got the other side of the case, where you have founders who sell a business, but they got the golden handcuffs, so they're staying for 1, 2, 3 years for their earn out. And there's normally a miscommunication, or miscommunication, sometimes a misunderstanding of what levers need to be achieved and how to achieve them. And those individuals tend to focus very much on appeasing the business owners of said business that have acquired them, and then forget about their own culture. And then you start to see the stresses and strains of the original owners of the business. It starts to crumble, because then they feel slightly disillusioned or misguided in some way because of maybe, again, miscommunication, and it starts to tumble down again. So you can suddenly see why such a high percentage of acquisitions fail. But something I'll just to move on to another question for you. So, I mean, you and I've again, we've talked about this in the past. How do you go about to reset a culture when subcultures take root and create fractions within a culture? How do you go about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I think it can tie into something I also wanted to say about what you've just been saying, which is succession planning. But it's planning for that. Yeah. So I'll come back to that. Yeah. But for the subculture, it's about having it's looking at to see how your culture is being lived out day to day within the groups, and having that transparency and openness to actually be aware of what it is you're looking for. So what is it about your culture that should be seen in the practices of the teams that are working for you, and being aware of where it's not happening. And if it's not happening, why is it not happening? What's the culture within that? It's easy to see as when you look at who goes to lunch when. Yeah. Are particular people going off to lunch together at a different time? Is there a resistance to being with others? It's looking to see those sort of cliques forming. Yeah. But then also it's looking to see, has that changed their working practices? So have working practices within a group changed? And I think that's the thing where, are they still working in accordance with what you've set out, or have they created a whole new way, which might work better? It's not saying it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
It might work better, but they've taken it on themselves to do that. And so it's then, I guess, having a dialogue with them. It's having a conversation. If you've started doing things in this way, why is that? What was wrong with the way that we were doing things? Great. If you want that to change, then that's fine. We can look at it. And listening and being open to having it as a two-way dialogue is really important, because you want them to, if they have created a better way, you want to bring that on board, and you want that to be seen, to be listening. And I think you have to look at yourself and say, why were they not able to just bring it to you in the first place?
Yes.
Why did the subculture, is there an open communication where they're able to come to you if they want to change things? Or is it that there is potentially an individual within that team who is not fitting the culture and has created a subculture based around what they like? So that's where you get someone coming in who's going to be a disruptor of your culture, and that's what you don't want. So it can be that the group have just found a better way and they're doing things, but they're all they've just got on with it. They don't realise actually they created a subculture. So it can be very positive, and it can be something you just need to be more transparent about and open to. But it can also be the sign that someone is in there. So if you have someone who does not align with your culture, then that's about having lots of discussions with them and management of them to see whether it's sustainable or whether they need to leave.
Wow. Okay. I never looked at it that way, actually. Obviously you and I, we go in, or our teams go in from a consultative perspective. Obviously, we're parachuted in normally to help navigate these challenges and help put in a plan of action in place for business to implement. Is it something, though, that once they've got the tools, business leaders can just run with it themselves, and do they need consultative help on an ongoing basis?
Sorry. Talking over the top of you, so I'm sorry. No, I'm going to come back to the point I wanted to make about that. But you were talking about an organisation, so when they take over, and so the organisation that's being taken over, or the business leader that stepped back. So what there isn't happening is succession planning. And so when you're this won't happen in organisations where there are financial implications. And I think those are a different situation, because that needs an acute culture change. Yeah, it does. And it's probably not a permanent one. It's probably a temporary one. It's a kind of emergency measures package needs to come in. So let's say we're talking about a successful company. If you are a company owner and you have a successful company, but that you wish to be bought out, you're going off to live a nice time, have a nice time. You need to succession plan that. So you need to be bringing up the leaders that can then carry through the culture, so that you keep your best people. That needs to be a part of the discussions of the acquisition. So like we said about promoting internally, if you can say, I've got this person ready, they will look after it and sustain it. You may do what you like in the long term, but in the short term, you're buying not just a viable company, you're buying this person who will take over and be better than me because they've got more energy for it. They're more this, they're more that. You can it's a much more sellable proposition if you have the succession planning in place. But I think sometimes people think it won't be. They think that the person coming in will want to lead it, and therefore they have to kind of present a blank canvas. I would say that that's not a particularly good model. That's hit or miss. We've already said that will either work or it won't. And that's dangerous. But if you wanted just even for 12 months to give a successful proposition, then to have that succession planning, to know, and to actually be taking a step back during that period, so that the company do not feel that void. And clients do not feel that void, because the person stepping in has taken over that role bit by bit, so that they become, and that takes planning. But that means that you've got a really smooth piece of change management, and everybody goes into this and comes through it unscathed, and you get to leave. So I think so my answer to you is all these tools are there for somebody. Just it just takes awareness, it takes a bit of knowledge about it, and then doing it, but doing it all the time, making it part of your leadership. I think, we started going back to that phrase where you were saying, and I know you've said this before, that people do think it happens organically. And what I would say is that it just happens without anybody taking note of it, and therefore it happens haphazardly. And that's not a strong culture. The strongest cultures are cultures that have existed for years and years and years and years, where people know exactly what to do when they arrive somewhere, what they know what the norms are. You're talking about the norms in a place, and you want to know what they are. And then people get that gut feeling the minute they walk in the door of knowing what your culture is. If you think of old established restaurants in the centre of town, if you go to Simpsons, that there is a culture there that you, even as a visitor, are expected to play a part in.
Yes.
That they don't change leader to leader.
No.
That culture prevails. The new person coming in will be recruited to be able to continue that culture and adjust it to things that are happening externally that need to be taken into account. So, an evolving culture. So not saying it'll be set in stone, but that culture will prevail. And I think that level of culture means that's where you get. I was watching a thing about one of these, the hotels where they go off and visit these incredible hotels.
Yes.
And when you go to these places where you've got the culture right, I think they're a really good case study, because you're looking at 1,000 stars in one place. All singing from the same hymn sheet, loving what they do, working really hard. That's what you want. You want people to love where you work. So we've talked about all of this, and I feel like it sometimes comes across in a kind of draconian, we create a culture so people will do what we want. Actually, what we want is to create a culture so people love what they do. And they love what they do, whether they're sitting at home with the dog, or they love what they do because they're on a commuter train coming in to see you at 7 a.m, because they're happy to do that, because they love what they do. I have been the most lucky person, I think, in terms of my work. I absolutely love what I do, and I've loved what I do for years.
Same.
And I only once went to work somewhere that the culture was wrong, and I left within 6 months. So, you want people to love it, because then they'll work really. As a leader, you want them to do that because you want everybody to be happy, because they will work more. But also, they'll make everybody else happy, and it's a happy place to work. It's a productive place to work. And so it's really all about, if you can be really clear about the culture, you'll attract the right people, and then everything will then perpetuate, because the right people will attract other right people. And the right people is just what's right for you, not what's right in a big way. So it is about, and I like people to be happy. That's kind of what I like to do. So this is all about people being happy in your organization. So I do, going back to your question, absolutely, you can do this, but I also think the rewards are so palpable as a leader, that, and they're so palpable if they're not going well, that it's not a difficult thing to take on board and do more of, because you'll see when it's working really quickly, and you'll see when it's not working really quickly.
I agree.
So I think it's really sustainable.
So it's you're absolutely spot on. And it's funny, because when talking to businesses before we've gone in and roll out some of these programs, they when they sit through it, they always come back and they go, you know what, this seems so obvious. Why didn't we do this beforehand? And you sit there and go, and I know why. I said, I've been in their shoes. I said, you're so busy, rightly so, looking after servicing clients and delivering business, that it's sometimes very easy to forget about your own culture, because you're so busy focusing on delivery that it can sometimes be overlooked. And and we've seen businesses sometimes attempt to do an audit on their culture or make some initial changes, and they're normally very tiny steps, and sometimes something's better than nothing, but they only do it for a little bit, and they bounce into it, and then they bounce straight out again because they get distracted by obviously their day-to-day business running, and then the ball's dropped, and then it goes back to exactly where it was beforehand, and then they come and say, why hasn't worked? You go, well, it's an ongoing process.
But I'm going to say, you think you're busy with the service, a part of your business, but I bet you're busier with Brian's 28th request for leave on a day that can't happen. I bet you're busier with lots of your employees being not very well and not coming in, and and also with people's complaints about other people within the organisation. So I think if somebody wants to know the value of this, sit down on a Friday afternoon and tot up how much of your week you spent dealing with people's unhappiness.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a real simple way of doing a basic audit.
And complaints. And I'm not saying you won't get complaints and, happening. People are unhappy, and things happen to them. But and then look at those things that happened and think how many of those are down to somebody being in the wrong place, having a team member who's not the right culture, who's impacting on them, or a lack of clarity over what the expectations are and how we do things, and they're doing things at odds. And actually, why do they not know that? Because we spend so much time telling people how to do things again and again and again and again, when maybe they just weren't clear in the first place. And maybe we've also got a policy that doesn't enable that. We've maybe got conflicting things going on in our actual the way that we expect our expectations and the way things are carried out. So I think when I say an audit, I mean that it can be as simple as that. Sit down with a pen and paper, a cup of tea, and look at your work week.
Depending on how bad the week's been. So I've got two final questions for you, because and we may have touched on one of these, but I maybe bring a bit of clarity to it again. So what does a successful culture look like and bring to an organization? Now, that's probably quite a simple statement, but just educate me on this one. What would describe a good successful culture?
Everybody knows why they're there. Everybody knows what they're doing, and everybody's working together. That's what I would say. The why they're there, I mean, they know why they're doing account managing in that organisation.
That's it.
They know why they are there.
Yeah.
They know they're there because they absolutely love the fact that everybody can bring their dogs in on a Friday. But they know that genuinely, on a real level, jokes aside, they know that this is so a caring environment, and that's really important to them, so that then when they did have a problem, they were able to turn to their manager, and they knew before they even spoke that culture would mean that they had an openness to say that, and that they had an openness. On the other side, they're there because they are really driven by transactionally, they're driven by money, and they know that organisation will pay them on time, will value the fact that they worked an extra 2 hours, they will get paid for that, the fact that they've put in extra effort, they will get the money, they will get compensated for that. And that's what matters to them. So it's not, I'm not all being on the soft side.
Of course.
It's horses for courses.
Of course.
People will go and say, but they know why they're there. And they know what they're doing there, so that it's really clear how they're living that out in the day to day. So in the second example, they know, for instance, that they'll put in a timesheet and billing will happen really quickly. Because there's no way somebody who's really orientated like that wants a disorganized administration, an accounts department that doesn't follow through. So you can, it's every element of the business will work towards that culture, and therefore I will know. The same thing with the caring side. You wouldn't have that where, it's all right to talk to, Mary because she'll be nice, but if we go in and see Raj, they won't be. So it's being really clear as well that it's all the way through. That's carried out.
Love it. No, okay. So I think you've probably answered my final question for you, which was, I was going to ask why wise culture makes people work for you and obviously stay with you, but I think you may have actually just covered that one. But obviously, I mean, maybe just repeat it for me just in case, but I mean,
because they care, because they'll care. Because if I'm working for the culture that reflects who I am, I'll care. And I'll care about, because people want to have a purpose and be valued, and to value what they do. And working in the right culture means all of those things are happening. The purpose is aligned with my purpose in life. It's value driven in the same way values I have. And everybody there is the same. So I also feel valued because other people are recognizing that I am living out those values, and that's really lovely. So I feel valued, and I value everyone that's around me because they're all living out those values.
No, that's true.
So it's everybody's on the same hymn sheet.
So I suppose then bringing it down to, with my business hat on, obviously that should then be reflected from the commercials as well then, because obviously, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket.
The value. So I think when I talk about values, everyone thinks I'm talking about something soft and fluffy. I'm not. If the value is in an organisation that we are completely ruthless. I'm making up a villains organization here, but if you were working for the Joker in Batman, but if everything is aligned, it's about alignment. So it is about the bottom line.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
All of that is going to work towards the bottom line. It's not a soft thing. It's the reason I get up. It's the reason I go in. It's the reason I work hard, and it's the reason I care that you see I work hard, and that you value that, and then I work even harder, and because we're all doing the right thing.
So it's funny because I think from an observational perspective, which I'm privileged to sit in, I was about to say I think a change is coming. What I'm going to correct that statement by saying is I think it's already happening, as in I see already cultures within businesses stretched at the moment. I mean, without turning to a political discussion, we all know we've all survived, or pretty much the last 5 years, or was it since COVID started? Sorry, 3 years, beg your pardon. The changes that have happened and probably the most dramatic changes we've seen in our lifetime. Obviously not for maybe different generations, but how we work, how we engage, technology coming in, AI now, the new influence into our space at the moment. I am certainly already witnessing this year, especially, more unrest with employees than I think I've ever seen in my 15 years. And I think it's been brought on by, yes, the fact that flexible working, yes, that obviously in certain sectors, AI is coming in, there's uncertainty. Yes, you could talk about cost of living. Yes, you could talk about political challenges that are coming up at the moment around the world, blah, blah. Funnily enough, all these influences does impact the mindset of these employees and where they and how and the one place they feel, or they should feel safe, valued, passionate about is obviously where they work. And if there is an opportunity to move on, I think they are more willing to have conversations now than they've ever done beforehand, because there are far more opportunities than there were even 10 years ago. And there's far more job opportunities on the market and new businesses starting up. And I think as an industry, I think we're evolving emotionally as well. And I rather than looking back, let's go back to our parents' generation. And you and I jested about this only the other day. I remember when we first went to work in the early 90s, the conversation always go from my family, we're going, you find a job, you stay in that for long. It was expected of me to stay in a job for a very long period of time, 10, 15 years, like my father before him. It was seen as you took a job, the idea was you stayed with that firm, ideally indefinitely, but never the case, but obviously for an extended long period of time. Now, I think the average we're seeing, when you look at people's CVs and when you talk about clients' expectations, if you've stayed in a job for more than 2 years, that's seen as a long time. That's committed. It never used to be like that. I mean, 2 years, you were a job hopper. And now it's a case of, well, that's okay. Obviously, that person's committed to that role. It's funny, the shifts that we're going through. And I think that's why I wanted to correct my original statement saying, I think we're on the beginning of a change. I think we've already started that change. I think it's probably slowly started 2 years ago, but it's definitely starting to build momentum this year. And I think businesses are going to have an interesting time. I mean, and the biggest topic at the moment, I think, on most business leaders at the moment when they talk about employees, and we get pulled into these conversations on a regular basis, is all about the work from home. How many days in the office, how many from home? More businesses are trying to encourage their employees to come back in for whatever reason, and that's for another podcast, I'm sure, but trying to bring people back in because they feel the value more of having those individuals in and the team around each other to spark off. But obviously, I don't think, this is a personal perspective now, I don't think that is going to be enforceable. I think people have got a taste of, it's not freedom, but I think flexibility, that they don't want to be back in the office on a full-time basis. They enjoy the fine balance. And I think businesses, I think that's going to be an interesting topic for years to come on how that is structured. But
yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying about when you are bringing your team together. So I think if you want to perpetuate your culture with the hybrid model, you need to decide what that culture looks like as a hybrid. So it's no point in looking at it as everybody in the office, everybody at home. Now you need to think about how do we utilize the time, and I think companies are, how do we utilize the time and space that we have when we pull people together to reinforce the culture. So I think that's really important. I think you've got to look at the practices in a hybrid when people are remote. How are you still able to reinforce the culture? So even things like, what are your expectations on Zoom calls? What are your expectations in terms of, so I have a set of practices I have to carry out when I do a Zoom in terms of blurring my background, etc., etc. So just professional practices. Now, you may think that's not, again, to say that this is top down, but actually it's just reminding someone they do work for someone. So, they don't just work for themselves. It's genuinely, they don't just work with the dog. So it's just reminding people that there is a culture in a way, but also what the most important thing is when you do bring people together, I think, what does that look like, and how do you not how do you all have a social? I think it's actually about when they're all together and you've got people together, or a team comes in out of them all, what are they doing in that time, and how are they embodying the values of the organization during that time? So it's about looking through what you've got planned for people when they come together through a cultural lens. How do we actually look at what we're doing, and look at that through a cultural lens? So I think that's really important. In terms of, I think there's a shift. I think there is a shift in terms of people are working, they are more isolated, but that's made quite a lot of people not very happy as well. So they want to have a bond. So I think it's evolving. I don't think it's finished yet, because I also think what we're talking about, and I see this working with people, we're looking at people now post-COVID, people last year, and I say people in my limited experience, but working with people last year, they were coming from a different perspective from the year before. So the emotional, so I'm looking at this from more of my emotional perspective, or emotionally informed perspective. People are still coming through this, and there is a movement now to a new, we're not going back, we'll never go back, because people have come through something, but there is a movement now, I think, towards a more collaborative approach, where people are looking forward and their social skills have increased. The comfort of being around people has increased, just because we've got used to doing it again after such a, and it was a long period of time in most people's lifetimes to not be in those situations. So people are naturally evolving. So I think if I'm an organisation, I'd be looking at more a short-term, medium-term and a long-term on this. I wouldn't be making big drastic changes to the culture. I'd be looking to see how I'm reinforcing the culture in all aspects of communication. That's the biggest way you can do it. I'd be looking at monitoring it. I'd review it. I'd do a 6-monthly review on what's that looking like with and actually get a voice from everybody. How are they feeling about the working hybrid? What can be improved to make it more? What would people like to feel more part of the organisation? Listen to them, but don't think that's it. People are just getting used to things again. So I would then think in 6 months' time, previously it can change again. We are in a process of transformation out of COVID, and it's taking, I think, a lot longer than people might have thought.
Agree. I think we're in new territories at the moment, and I, as I say, it's unusual territories. I don't think anyone could have predicted where we would be 4 years ago, let alone 3 years ago. I think we're all still trying to get our heads around AI at the moment and how that's going to improve inverted commas our lives.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation, and with people far more. I'm actually looking at it for some of the other work that I do. I was looking at it this morning. I think there are severe limitations around it. That's all I would say. So I think it's about using it, how it helps and hinders, rather than it replacing. That's what
agreed. And I think definitely we'll have a more deeper discussion on that, I think, on the next time, because that's definitely a hot topic at the moment in our circles. Fiona, listen, I've thoroughly enjoyed this morning. Thank you, obviously, once again for joining me. That was brilliant. I know we could talk for hours, as we always do. But so everybody who's listening, if you have any questions, you've got any thoughts, or have any want to share any insights, feel free to drop us a line. Our details will be dotted around the screen, I'm sure. Otherwise, you can contact us at hello@jefferson.global. And hope you enjoyed today's session. Speak to you all soon.
Thanks very much.